Good morning. I'm Diane Macedo. Thanks for streaming with us. In today's update, coronavirus has killed more Americans in the past week than the flu did all of last year. A White House coronavirus task force report obtained by ABC News says nearly all metro areas over 500,000 people are in full resurgence. More than 10 million people have received their first dose of the COVID-19 vaccine out of the 29 million doses distributed. Now stadiums and arenas are turning into vaccine megasites across the country. President Trump is headed for a Senate trial after becoming the first president in history to be impeached twice. 10 House Republicans voted in favor, making it the most bipartisan impeachment vote ever. The president faces a single charge of inciting an insurrection in the wake of last week's riot on Capitol Hill. The Senate trial could start as early as Tuesday, his last day in office. Plus, sources tell ABC News the entire National Mall will be closed on Inauguration Day. It's the latest in a series of security measures to protect the city in the wake of that attack on the Capitol. Meanwhile, the investigation continues. ABC News has confirmed retired firefighter Robert Sanford of Chester, Pennsylvania, was arrested this morning on 3 federal charges. Investigators say he is the person seen on video throwing a fire extinguisher at Capitol Police. And another lawmaker has tested positive for COVID-19. Democratic Congressman Adriano Espaillat voted in person yesterday and spoke on the House floor. More than half a dozen lawmakers have tested positive since the Capitol siege. ABC News political director Rick Klein joins me now for more on all of this. Rick, sources close to President Trump say he was angry as he watched some of his most loyal allies condemn his conduct yesterday. How large is the rift now between Trump and the Republican Party, and what do they need to do to move forward?
10 Republicans in the House voting for impeachment, a greater number saying that the president almost certainly did commit impeachable offenses, and some unknown number who probably would have privately voted yes if they weren't worried about either the political backlash or the backlash to their own safety. The rift in the party is growing, and it is growing by the minute. The president's behavior since last Wednesday has only exacerbated a lot of the tensions that have been felt in the Republican Party for a long time. And look, most Republicans who voted for President Trump are not like those who showed up at the mall and not like those who rioted at the Capitol. But the fact that some are, and the fact that some are not seeing distance put between themselves and some of the elected leaders is what's driving some Republicans. I talked to one Republican who voted for impeachment yesterday, and his reaction to all of this is that he hopes a third-party movement comes out of this, because it would be easier for the Republican Party if the true hardcore supporters of President Trump that believe the election was stolen, that believe the actions last week were justified, they should leave the party entirely.
And we're also hearing top aides discussed the possibility of him resigning with President Trump, but ultimately said it was a non-starter in part because the president doesn't trust the vice president to pardon him. What happens if Trump pardons himself?
Well, it opens up a whole legal can of worms. I mean, he can do it. He could try to do it. He can issue that pardon. Whether it holds up in court, whether you're able to pardon yourself, has never been tested before in American history. There's different legal schools of thought around that. And of course, as we've talked extensively about, Diane, there is no pardoning for state charges or other even civil charges that might result out of his actions last week or at any number of episodes beyond that. Remember, we were talking about the possibility of self-pardon before last Wednesday. I think it's more likely than not, given the events that have happened, that we'll see another raft of pardons that may include President Trump himself. But whether that holds water or not is a big question. And the fact that that's even a consideration over whether he'd resign is itself astounding.
All right, Rick Klein, thank you. And Jacob Blake sat down for his first interview since he was shot 7 times and partially paralyzed by a police officer last summer. Kenosha County District Attorney announced last week that the officers involved will not be charged. Here's Michael Strahan.
You didn't resist.
I resisted to getting beat on. And what I mean by that is not falling, not letting them put their head on my neck. That's all I was thinking, honestly.
This morning, Jacob Blake is speaking out for the first time, almost 5 months after being shot 7 times by police, leaving him partially paralyzed.
I was counting down my breaths, my blinks. I was like, God, I'm coming. I guess this is it for me.
All unfolding as his sons watched from the back seat of that car.
I was like, he's shooting me. I couldn't believe it, so I kind of sat down in the car trying to do this. put my hands up because I didn't want him to shoot me in my face or in my head or nothing. He just kept shooting,
So what's going through your mind?
My babies are right here, my babies. So after he stopped shooting me, I said, Daddy, love you, no matter what. I thought it was going to be the last. I thought it was going to be the last thing I say to them. Thank God it wasn't.
The incident once again sparking protests across the country, adding fuel to a fire that had been burning all summer since the police killing of George Floyd.
I didn't want to be the next George Floyd. I didn't want to die.
It was August 23rd, and Blake was at the house of LaQuisha Booker, the mother of 3 of his children. They were celebrating their son Israel's 8th birthday when an argument broke out between Booker and a neighbor.
So I just wanted to get them, I wanted to leave. My son is inside. Tears was coming out his eyes. And he said, Daddy, you sure it's my birthday? I'm like, yeah, you know, I was like, I'm taking him to the store again, make him forget about all this.
As Blake prepares to leave, Booker calls police.
I wanted to take that risk. Yes, I need an officer. Jacob Blake is here, and he has the keys to a rental that I purchased that I need to take back, and he's not trying to release it.
Police respond to a, quote, family trouble. They're told there's a warrant for Blake on domestic violence offenses and sexual assault. What are you doing when they show up?
At that time, I'm walking out. I hadn't done anything, so I didn't feel like they were there for me.
Blake proceeds to put one of his sons in the car, and that's when he says he felt someone grab his arm.
I took my arm away in a human reaction. After I did that, I realized that it was the police, and it's like, uh-oh, because when I did that, he slammed me up against the truck.
Before the cop grabbed you, did they say anything to you?
No, not at all.
According to the Wisconsin Criminal Investigation Report, Officer Shesky recalled saying, quote, let's talk about this. He said Blake put his child in the car and turned to face him. Shesky said he then grabbed Blake's arm to put him under arrest and told Blake that he had a warrant. They didn't say why they were there?
Mm-mm. They didn't say anything to me.
Did they tell you that they had a warrant for your arrest?
No.
Some sort of struggle follows. Police believe Blake is reaching for a weapon more than once. Blake denies this. Police deploy a taser multiple times. Blake pulls the taser prongs out of his skin. Officer Shesky and Blake end up in a physical altercation on the ground. We see you walk away from the officers after they try to grab you.
I'm rattled. You know, I realized I had dropped my knife, a little pocket knife. So I picked it up after I got off of him because they tased me and I fell on top of him.
With an open knife in hand that Blake says fell out of his pocket, he walks around the front of the vehicle towards the driver's side door. What are you thinking at that point?
I'm not really worried. I'm walking away from them, so it's not like they're gonna shoot me. I shouldn't have picked it up, only considering what was going on. At that time, I wasn't thinking clearly.
You were thinking once you get the knife into the car, you were going to just say,
throw myself to the ground and, you know, put my arms behind my back. Because if they did it there and they killed me there, everybody would see it.
According to the Wisconsin Criminal Investigative Report, Officer Shesky says that Blake drove the knife towards Shesky's body. Blake denies this. Blake opens the car door, and at that moment, Officer Shesky grabs the back of Blake's shirt and starts shooting. You said that we can just look at the video, and the video tells everything. There are going to be a lot of people who look at the video and say, in the video, you're walking away from the police. So why didn't he just stop and do what the police are asking him to do?
I couldn't hear that. All I heard was screaming, screaming. My ears was ringing, so it was all muffled.
If the police were fighting me, if they were tasing me, I would stop walking away from them, and they would have my attention.
I mean, I had not left or tried to run at that point. That when they tased me, I had my hands up.
Officer Shesky's attorney says Blake was given every opportunity to comply, but he chose not to, and insists that, quote, the officers acted according to their training. According to records released in the Wisconsin Criminal Investigation Report, in the past, Blake has been arrested for attempting to flee police and for resisting arrest. These charges were dropped. There are critics who are going to say, well, he's had run-in with the law in the past. he doesn't deserve any sympathy.
If you're a black person in America and you're not perfect, then they say, oh, it was justified. It's like our children have to be angels.
And we know your kids who were in the car. Have you had any conversations with them about this since it all happened?
I've explained to him and broke it down to him, like, Daddy can die, but for some reason I didn't that day.
And Jacob is getting ready to have his 37th surgery and is in physical rehab 4 days a week. His attorney will be filing a civil suit against the Kenosha Police Department. Our thanks to Michael Strahan for that interview. And for more on the fallout from this case and the interview, I want to bring in ABC News contributor LZ Granderson and the founder of the Black Police Experience, Sonia Pruitt. Good morning to you both. Thank you for being here.
Thank you.
I'd like to start with a question to both of you. And Sonia, you can answer first. But did you hear anything from this interview that changes your thoughts on this case at all?
I heard nothing that changed my mind. I had already watched that video several times. And, you know, first of all, I'm feeling some empathy for Mr. Blake because he was put in a really difficult situation. And let me tell you why. There were options for the police officers outside of shooting. There were several officers on the scene. They should have been able to arrest one man, and they had an opportunity to do so without shooting. Shooting should be a last resort. There was an option to disengage. I never saw Mr. Blake pull his knife and lunge towards the officer or even move towards the officer. He tried to get into the car. So I am still feeling very uncomfortable with the officer's version of things, but here's something else to consider. Officers often cite an adrenaline rush. It causes tunnel vision, a loss of hearing. There's a fight or flight trigger that happens during these encounters. So why would it not follow that the person that they're attempting to arrest might not have these same physical manifestations in a stressful situation, making it difficult to follow orders?
LZ?
I agree with everything that was just said. There appeared to me, and obviously I'm not a trained police officer, but it just seemed as if there were other options before shooting a man multiple times in the back in order to make an arrest. When I listened to his description of his encounter with the police officers, it rang true to me based upon my own personal experience. I, as a young man, had a gun drawn on me by a plainclothes police officer growing up in Detroit. I had no idea he was a police officer until the gun was out, pointed towards me, and by the grace of God, I am here today. So while I was listening to his account, I recognized that there may be some contrarians who roll their eyes and say, you should have just complied, you should have done this, you should have done that. First of all, you weren't there. Second of all, we don't know the full backstory, but most importantly, I didn't see anything in that video that looked as if it required lethal force to be used against Jacob Blake. And I recognize Kenosha Police Department said that the officers follow their procedures. I don't know the procedures, but there seemed to be something dastardly wrong if part of the procedure is shooting a man multiple times in the back.
And Sonia, the DA says the day that he was shot, the mother of Blake's children called 911 saying he was going to take off in her rental car with the kids. Police were also told he has a warrant on domestic violence offenses and sexual assault, and he had a knife. You are a former police chief. How should all of that play into the way officers respond to a case like this?
You know, we want to take into consideration all of the facts. But for me, none of that amounts to, well, let's make sure that, you know, this guy gets 7 bullets in the back. OK, because of this. Generally, officers are not trained to ensure that everyone goes home. Our training, well, when I was a police officer, was about the officer going home. There's not a holistic view of everyone's safety. And at the end of the day, when you leave these encounters, the officer wants to go home to their loved ones, and so does the suspect, because suspects have loved ones, right? We're trained that it's better to be judged by 12 than carried by 6. That, for me, is ridiculous, and we need to change that mindset, change that type of training. We need to make it clear and very important that everyone is important, no matter what their background.
And LZ, the fact that Blake survived this shooting and is now able to speak about it from a first-person perspective is a rarity. How do you think that could impact the fight for racial equality and justice in policing and the kind of changes that Sonia's talking about in general?
Well, I think first and foremost, having someone able to share that side of the story is very important in this situation, because oftentimes if you're an Ahmaud Arbery, if you're George Floyd, if you're a Breonna Taylor, you don't have that opportunity to share what you experienced during this encounter. But there are other procedural things that the Kenosha Police Department needs to look at, as well as law enforcement in general should consider. For example, body cameras were approved by the city years ago, but they balked at doing it because of the price of doing so. Well, now they're facing something I would say is much more costly than just buying body cameras. Not only are you talking about the damage that was caused by some of the rioters who was taking advantage of the situation, but you're facing civil suits, but more importantly, you're facing credibility issues within your community. You have an entire swath of people that you must be in part of, serving, who do not trust you. That is nothing you can put a price tag on. So body cameras, I believe, is a good step. It isn't the cure-all, but it certainly is a good step. And there's one other thing for those who may be rolling their eyes wondering, well, why didn't he just comply? The officer had no choice. Last week, we saw a domestic terrorist attack at the Capitol. We had members of Congress running for their lives. We saw insurgents try to stop a constitutional procedure. We know what happened during that day. And we all know if those individuals who flooded the Capitol were of color, things would have ended it a lot more differently. So all I'm saying is, I'm not concerned about whether or not Jacob Blake is a good person or not. I'm concerned about whether or not law enforcement views him as a person, the same way they would view a white person. That's what I'm asking.
And Sonia, I want to go back to the body cam point that LZ is making. How much does that make a difference in a case like this? Because again, while Jacob Blake can now tell his story, most victims like this usually cannot. So how much does it impact things when you can see for yourself what happened, or at least part of what happened? And this debate, for example, Jacob Blake is saying the officer did not identify himself, that he didn't make clear that he had a warrant and he was putting him under arrest. He just knew that someone grabbed his arm. How much of a difference does that make in a case like this? And for the public trust in general, I should add.
Oh, yeah, it makes a whole lot of difference. Since the inception of body-worn cameras, we have been able to see what before and historically we were not able to see. We were able to see the disparities in what the officer might have said in a police report and what actually happened. We see that here. We never, at least in our camera view, see Jacob Blake pull his knife and actually push his knife towards the police officer. That is a red flag. Now, again, everybody's memory may be a little foggy during an encounter like this. But why is it that the officer gets the benefit of the doubt and the suspect, in this case, Mr. Blake, does not? He should. He's another human being. People should listen to what he has to say, too. Instead, we get to hear about his criminal past, his criminal history. He had a warrant. At the end of the day, those things are not really important in this moment. We're talking about this incident, and that is the type of thing that erodes the public trust. But again, ever since the advent of body-worn cameras and camera phones, we're able to have a clearer view of what is happening. And, we have to just, I hear our other guests talk about what happened at the Capitol. Imagine if there were no cameras. We needed to be able to see these disparities. We need to be able to see the things that just don't mesh for us as a Black community. And everyone else should be able to see it too. So cameras are really important.
It is eye-opening, and many of us don't like what we see, but at least it helps us to be able to move forward and hopefully address some of these issues that we were blind to for so long. LZ, one of the hardest parts about the Blake case is the kids. So what do you think about when you think about his kids, what they witnessed and what kind of an impact that has, not only on them personally, but also what happens the next time they are approached by a police officer?
I can only assume they'll be scared for their lives based upon what they witnessed. And it's a shame that we don't consider the impact from a mental health perspective, not just on children, but just on everyone when they are traumatized by something like this. I'm pretty sure the people who called the police officers did not call the police so that they could try to shoot and kill Jacob Blake. They were just trying to resolve a domestic dispute. So that person is probably feeling a certain amount of guilt and mental anguish. And the poor children are stuck in the same cycle that I was on when I was exposed to things like this, to many people in this country who are trying to navigate. To this day, when an officer pulls behind me when I'm on the highway, there is an involuntary bodily response. My palms get sweaty, my body gets tense, and there's very little I can do to stop it. And I've been to a therapist about it. So I can only imagine what these poor children are trying to navigate and deal with, as well as everyone else who bared witness to what transpired.
It's something this whole country is going to have to reckon with. ABC News contributor LZ Granderson and former Montgomery County Police Captain Sonia Pruitt, thank you both. And that does it for this ABC News Live update. I'm Diane Macedo. Thanks for joining us. And remember, ABC News Live is here for you all day with the latest news, context, and analysis. I'll see you back here at 3 p.m. Eastern with Terry Moran for The Breakdown.
Hi everyone, George Stephanopoulos here. Thanks for checking out the ABC News YouTube channel. If you'd like to get more videos, show highlights, and watch live event coverage, click on the right over here to subscribe to our channel, and don't forget to download the ABC News app for breaking news alerts. Thanks for watching.